Hey everyone, this is The Three Men. Just wanted to remind you that we recorded several episodes before the DNA results came in and we all learned about Coley McCraney. This is one of those episodes.
We also ask that you keep in mind that Coley McCraney is innocent until proven guilty. You'll learn in episodes 4 and 5 that charges being filed in this case don't necessarily mean that it's been solved.
Episodes will continue every other week right up until a special live stream on July 31st, which is JB's birthday and, unfortunately, the 20th anniversary of this senseless tragedy.
This case started almost 20 years ago when a car was found on the side of a road. Are we now on the road to justice? It continues right now on Three Men and a Mystery. Welcome back. This is Three Men and a Mystery. I'm one of the three men, John Lorden.
And I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And today we are going to be talking about the physical evidence in JB and Tracie's case. This is one that, I don't know, I've kind of got butterflies in my stomach, I guess. Initially, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of physical evidence to talk about, but as we learn more about this case, there's a lot of kind of known physical evidence. There's some physical evidence that is coming from rumors. So is it really physical evidence at that point? I don't know, but we got a lot to cover in today's episode and we want to get to it. So before we do that, we've got a couple of questions I want to answer. One of them is, I keep seeing reference to this area being called the Wiregrass, and I'm not familiar enough with it. So I did a little digging. I found a travel site specifically for Alabama, and it says the charming and eclectic Wiregrass region of Alabama is named for the native Aristida stricta, known as wiregrass due to its texture. Dothan is the heart of the area. The town of Dothan is also home to the world's smallest city block and the Wiregrass Museum of Art. And another aspect of this case, when you're looking into it, is there possibly someone from out of this area that could be responsible for this? So I asked Gray to take a look at the map, give us some more information about the highways involved there. Is it logical that could this be a situation where we have a trucker or someone out of the area? Gray, you want to tell us what you found?
Yeah, after looking at the map, you can see that the quickest route from the Big Little convenience store to Dothan would be to take East Broad Street, then to 123, and then to 231. These are both highways. And those 231 actually leads straight to Dothan. In Alabama, U.S. Highway 231 is also known as State Road 53. State Road 53 is around 345 miles long, most of which is a two-lane highway. U.S. 231, however, is 912 miles long, running north to south from St. John's, Indiana to Panama City, Florida. And after looking at the maps, you can see that it's heavily traveled by semis, trucks, all different types of transportation.
All right. So we're definitely talking about the possibility that this could be someone from out of the area that might be familiar with it. Maybe it's a regular route for them in some way. Gotcha. What else was interesting about it?
As you leave the Big Little convenience store, you see a crazy intersection. And this intersection is located in the heart of downtown Ozark with signs leading to 231 and 123. And there are two arrows that point left for South 231 and South 123. Then you see a straight arrow to 231 North just to the right of the 123 sign. To the right of that is a 123 North sign. However, the 231 North sign actually leads to US 231, where you can go either direction. It doesn't help either that the 231 and 123 signs have the same set of numbers. The intersection, which may play a role in this case, is 2 blocks from the Ozark Police Department and about 2 blocks from the Dale County Sheriff's Department.
I know it kind of it really blew my mind when I saw, and for the video version, we're going to bring up a photo of the actual sign here. Not only is it a confusing looking sign, you've got two highways that have the same numbers, but the numbers are just essentially in different order. And thinking about these girls driving in the middle of the night, knowing that they were lost. I mean, they had asked for directions right before this. To come across that sign could have certainly sent them in a different direction, maybe even than the directions they were given by the woman at the gas station. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah, so as a matter of fact, after you take that left, so you're at the intersection and you would take a left to get to 231. After about 2.5 miles of driving in that direction, you come to a decision point where there's a sign that says left to Dothan. Okay, but it doesn't say 231. So you would take that left and you would drive because you're heading to Dothan. But then later down that road, there's a sign that says 123 South. So I could see, being a young person, you're 17 years old, you're driving around, and you see, 123 South, because that reminds you of the same number, 231, that you were supposed to be on. But there's no signage after you take that left to Dothan that says you're on 231.
Right.
You see? So it's very confusing for anybody.
Certainly sounds like I'm pretty sure I could get lost out there as well. Morph, we had you look into some information, and obviously we're not quite at a point yet where we have direct contact with the family. They seem to be kind of tight-lipped in terms of helping our project in particular at this point, but they have done so much press in the past that we've been able to find some comments. You want to share with us what you were able to dig up?
Yeah, according to Carol Roberts, Tracie's mother, rumors and suggestions have played a large role in the murder case. She was quoted as saying, "You can't always believe what you hear. Over the years, it has been said that the girls were headed to a field party. No, they were not. They were headed to a birthday party for JB. There have been rumors on this person may have done it or that person may have done it. There are just so many questions that have not been answered. Why would someone do this? Who would do this? We may never know the answers to these questions. The one or the ones responsible for Tracie and JB's death may never be caught. But I pray every day that whoever is responsible is caught. I used to pray that whoever done this would never sleep another night until they confessed. I wanted that person to have sleepless nights. Lord knows I have had plenty. I take comfort in the fact knowing the last thing my daughter had said to me was, 'I love you.'"
All right, it's time to jump into the physical evidence, and we've got quite a bit to talk about here. I want to start with a comment from Myron Williams, the Ozark Police Department deputy police chief at the time. "We believe that they were killed sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. The car was left completely open." Now, one important aspect is the car was actually facing north on Herring Avenue. So if they would have been coming directly from Big Little, first of all, we know that they went kind of in a different direction right off the bat as they left the gas station. But if they had come directly from Big Little, you would assume that the car would actually be facing south on Herring Avenue, because Big Little is north of Herring Avenue. So this makes it seem like they actually came from a different location that was more than likely south of Herring Avenue. The car seemed to be dirty. And there's a little bit of a discrepancy when it comes to this information and how important it is. The woman who gave them directions at 11:30 said that the car looked very clean, but Officer Tony Smith of the Headland Police Department saw them in Headland around 10:30 that night, and he notes that the car was dirty. He specifically says, "I remember thinking, that's too nice of a car to be that dirty." One other interesting thing he noted was he saw them talking to someone at a gas station that was in a tan van. The car had some damage, but apparently was still drivable, and that's according to news reports. Unfortunately, we can't really find any details on the damage, and the one picture, or the pictures that we see most common of the vehicle, are from the rear, and there doesn't appear to be any obvious damage back there. So I don't know if they're just talking about, some type of fender bender or something like that on the front side. And then, of course, we get to one of the more interesting points, and it's highly debated in circles that talk about this case, the driver's side window being rolled down. Some people say it was partially rolled down. Others say that it was fully rolled down. And when you couple that up with the fact that we had JB's driver's license on the dashboard, certainly seems like there was possibly someone either faking that they were with law enforcement, or possibly law enforcement did this. You guys have some thoughts on that?
What's interesting about it is they say that the car wasn't, they weren't killed at that location, right? So you would think that the car would have been pulled up to there and they were already dead in the vehicle. So how did the license stay on the dashboard at that point?
Yeah, I think about these young girls driving around at night, and if they don't know the person that's pulling them over, assuming they were pulled over by somebody, they probably wouldn't stop, or they wouldn't be trusting. And maybe somebody acting as a police officer or an actual police officer makes sense and was able to gain their trust with a light or something to pull them over. And they thought, okay, we're being pulled over by the police, and they let their guard down. And that's how this all started, possibly.
I am seeing another possibility being discussed in some of the forums on this case, and that is that the driver's license wasn't actually on the dashboard at the time the car was driven there, but the responding officers that found it, maybe because the car was open and we know that their purses were inside, perhaps took the driver's license to see whose car it was and then put it on the dash after they were done. Which
maybe that's something standard that they do in a situation like that. They put the driver's license there so anybody looking at the car can then find the driver's license. It's similar to when they check pockets of a deceased person. They pull out the lining and they leave them out. They don't stick them back in, because then every other officer will come by and try to look into the pockets. If they're already out, they know they've been searched already.
Yeah. It's an interesting point because it's spoken about so much, and it could be something as simple as this was just a procedural step in terms of the police department that were investigating this car that was at the side of the road, that they didn't know why it was there and where the girls were. On top of that, their purses, jewelry, money, credit cards, all found in the car. The only thing missing, at least according to media sources, was the keys for the car. And they had a key fob on them that said "hard to get," and that was spelled out on white block plastic letters, essentially. And those keys still missing to this day. No one knows what happened to them. Some people wonder, were they taken as a trophy? Other people wonder, is there something more in lines of them trying to, well, it wouldn't necessarily be slowing down the investigation because they left the window down. But is it just maybe habit? As they got out of the car, they took the keys with them, wound up chucking them in the woods or something. But interestingly, the keys still have not been found. One of the aspects of this case that is discussed most frequently is the bullet casing. And in the media reports, it is noted as being on Tracie's leg. But there was a podcast that came out recently, and the family kind of spoke up at that point and said, no, the bullet casing was on JB's leg. And if you kind of consider that, according to what police have said, Tracie was in the trunk first, JB was in the trunk second, it might kind of be more logical that it would have been on JB's leg. What do you guys think about the bullet casing, and what's interesting about it? Gray?
Well, it's actually confusing, I guess is what you'd say, is how the bullet casing is balancing precariously on her leg. And then you also have the driver's license. So if it's determined that the driver's license was not placed there by law enforcement, you have two unusual things going on in the car.
Right, especially because the bullet casing is supposedly balancing on her leg, and police are being very clear that they were not shot at that location. More
Exactly.
Thoughts on the bullet?
Yeah, it makes sense that if JB was on top in the trunk, that the bullet, or the shell casing, I should say, is resting on her leg, because if it was on Tracie's underneath and JB was on top of her, it would have disturbed it and knocked it over. So I can see it being on hers on the very top, but that still doesn't explain how it's just sitting there nice and neat and not falling off and rolling into another part of the trunk.
It is a 9mm bullet casing, which, of course, some law enforcement officers do use. We also have a military base that is nearby, and, of course, 9mm are used by our military as well. So a couple of interesting angles when it comes to the type. To your point, I'm almost wondering about, is this kind of urban legend territory now about how it was resting on her leg? I'm not even really clear in terms of what types of clothing they were wearing. Were they wearing jeans? And then if they were wearing jeans, were they tight? Were they loose? I think everyone thinks of this situation, and when they hear that, they imagine that it was, resting on her bare leg. But if it was loose jeans, could it have been kind of in a fold of those jeans that would have kept it in place as the vehicle was moved? I don't know.
I wonder if they were able to determine if the shell is related to the bullet that was in JB, right? And where is the other shell casing? Were they able to find that in the trunk? They obviously didn't find that in the trunk, or maybe they have. We just haven't heard about it. And law enforcement doesn't tell everybody everything that they have.
Or potentially that could be part of the information in terms of why they are sure that the girls were shot somewhere else. Maybe because they couldn't find that other shell casing. It wasn't in the immediate area. But I guess you could assume the possibility that the perpetrator would have taken it. Yeah.
And also if she was shot, like let's say she was standing just outside the trunk, shot, the shell ejected, and then she sort of falls into the trunk and she's pushed back in there. That would be Howlett. And then JB was then shot second. But do they know if they were in the trunk when they were shot? Or could they have been placed in right after they were shot? That's
a pretty interesting question. I don't have clear information on it. I'm sure they know, because I'm sure the blood spatter would tell them that story pretty easily. The exit wound and how that blood would have sprayed from there would certainly leave a pattern, I think, on the inside of the trunk where they'd be able to determine that. Morph also raises an interesting question. I took a look at some footage of the same model car and the trunk space in particular. It's not the largest trunk you've ever seen, and it's very square. Some trunks have kind of different shapes, but it's very square in particular. So I'm also wondering, was Tracie kind of to the rear or further away from the end of the trunk, and then JB was closer to the actual end of the trunk? Or is it more like Morph was describing, where Tracie was below and JB had been laid on top? But unfortunately, we don't have that detail right now. Tracie had been shot in the temple, and JB was shot in the cheek. Now, you guys have looked into a lot of cases. I've looked into a lot of cases. Typically, when we hear about a shot to the temple, sometimes it's inferred that could be an expert of some kind when it comes to shooting. But a shot in the cheek is kind of strange and not always fatal. What do you guys think about this? Morph?
The shot in the cheek, to me, that seems like she's pulling away, she's flinching. It seems like that could explain that. The temple shot is a clear execution style shot. You're putting it up to somebody's temple, pulling the trigger. You're expecting them to die. It's not any kind of warning shot, or you're just trying to harm them. You're trying to execute them. And I think the same thing, if there's a temple shot and one's a cheek shot, I think it's because there was some flinching or some movement, and that caused the shot to be off a little bit.
Yeah, I would think that the shot to the temple was first, and then the other person realized that, oh, wow, we're being executed, and then flinched. The first person might not have... Who was shot in the temple again?
Tracie was shot in the temple.
All right, so she was shot in the temple, and then JB, realizing what was going on, maybe flinched a little bit, but she was killed by the shot regardless, so the person didn't shoot again.
Right, and we also have the possibility that something else happened. I don't know of the timing here, because if Tracie is shot and then something else happened to JB, we do know that DNA is found on her body, and it's a semen sample. I don't know how close to the shootings that would have happened, and some people even question if it actually occurred at the scene of the crime at all, or if this could have been a consensual act that happened previously in the day. But I imagine you guys are right in terms of once Tracie is shot, things shift in terms of the energy with JB and potentially trying to keep her controlled. So that might explain why the shot doesn't go through her cheek, or goes through her cheek and isn't placed in the temple again. And obviously the trajectory had to be where, even though it entered through her cheek, it still struck vital. It wasn't a clear shot in one cheek, out the other, or I've seen some cases where bullets can pass through people's necks and things of that nature. So this certainly seems like it only took one shot. I don't know. I don't know if this really helps us in terms of understanding if this is an expert or not, but there is intent that we can certainly get from this, and I think you guys both nailed it. This is execution style, and that really brings a lot of questions in terms of, well, what's the motive for this? And
one other point, just to mention, depending on the lighting out there, as dark as it was, the shooter may have thought that he shot her in the head if it was dark enough where he couldn't see where the bullet struck her.
Right.
Even though he had only shot her in the cheek. So had he known that he only shot her in the cheek, he or they, it's possible they might have fired another shot into her temple.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm wondering in that situation is, if they weren't sure if it was fatal, why didn't they follow it up with a second shot? Was there something else going on? Were they worried about timing or being found? And that's another interesting aspect of this case. The car is found within, how close is it, Gray, in terms of the police station and the sheriff's office?
It's less than a mile from the sheriff's, about a mile from the police department, and about 0.8 miles from the sheriff's department. So as a crow flies.
Yeah. So I would think if you were that close, the ability to hear gunshots and to have tipped off the police or the sheriffs that something was going on certainly tells us this probably didn't happen on Herring. And we know the police are saying that. They don't think that this happened on Herring. So they must have been a bit further south, I think, is the assumption most people make in that case.
I wonder if something happened to JB elsewhere, because it's interesting how she's always, she's in the trunk second. She has a different wound. Those kinds of things make you wonder if they weren't killed at exactly the same moment, like a quick boom, boom type of thing.
Like almost as if they wanted Tracie out of the way so they could have JB for a period of time to themselves.
That might lead you to believe that this could be one perpetrator instead of two. Possibly trying to handle two girls would have been too much for them to have taken on. So
that's a good point.
They thinned it down right off the bat. Yeah, that's interesting. We also find out that the girls had mud on their shoes. Tracie's New Balance shoes bought a week before were covered in mud. Her arm was scratched. Her pants had briars and were wet below the knee. And I believe both girls, actually, their pants were wet below the knee. So here maybe we're getting a little bit of an answer. I did see it noted as pants, so perhaps that bullet getting stuck in a wrinkle of pants isn't so hard to believe. But it's an interesting question about how did they get wet below the knee? What were they running through for that to have happened? And we've had Gray look into the area. There are water sources, even right next to where the car was found. There's a little creek. I don't know if it's a substantial enough water source for this, but Gray, you found other examples of water sources in the area as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's little ponds and marshy areas around, just not right next to where they were found.
Right.
That's the thing. I think there might be a creek. I actually wasn't even able to find that creek that you're referring to. I think I might see where it is, but I don't see any water at the time. But,
yeah, it's just kind of a thicket of trees almost that are nestled right around it. Yeah. Then we also find out that there is a palm print that is found on the trunk. And I'm actually curious if they might have more fingerprints. If we're assuming that the perpetrator actually drove the vehicle after he did this to them, wouldn't it be kind of easy to believe that there might be fingerprints inside the vehicle, unless he was wearing gloves while he was driving it, for some reason removed them, and then, Or I guess he would have put on the gloves after, actually. Maybe the palm print on the trunk is from the actual crime scene before he takes the vehicle back to Herring. So, yeah, I guess potentially he could have been wearing gloves after that. The law enforcement also notes that the car was almost out of gas. And this raises a whole bunch of different thoughts for me personally. I looked into it. This model car had an 18.5-gallon tank. It gets 19 city miles and 24 highway miles per gallon. So on an average full tank of gas, you would figure about 400, close to 400 miles could be driven. At 50 miles per hour, that's nearly 8 hours of drive time. And we know that they were out driving around from 10 to approximately 11:30. That's only 90 minutes. There is some information that the family says JB had actually filled up the car the day before. Some people wonder if that's actually accurate. You know, did we get a confirmation that the car was actually filled up at that point, or did her family just give her money to fill up the car and maybe she didn't use it all for that? So a lot of different things there. But where I get stuck is if the girls were noticing that the car was so low on gas and they're lost and they find out that they're in Ozark, they know that they're at least 20 miles away from home. Aren't they going to be concerned at any point about trying to find fuel? And we don't have the witness at Big Little saying, oh, by the way, the girls needed directions, but they were also concerned because they thought they might run out of gas on the way home. We have none of that happening. So there's some possibility that whoever did this could have driven the car a more considerable distance. There's a possibility that the girls could have traveled towards Dothan and got closer home before whatever happened to them, but then they were brought back to almost the precise location where they were last seen. It's just a really strange, a strange bunch of circumstances that are going on around this. What do you guys think, Morph?
It's the gas situation is an important question, because if it's someone driving it, then where did they go? Why did they put so many miles on it? Did they go out of the area? Was there someone else involved that they had to drop off out in another area? So you start asking those kind of questions. And then also, was it actually filled up to begin with? I know when I was a teenager, I might get some money from my parents for $20 for something and only spend 10 of it on what I was supposed to spend it on, and then spend the other 10 on something else. So with something like that at play, and it's a little less sinister because it's a little bit more of a easy explanation for it.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking, why didn't they get gas when they were at the BP station earlier? Because that was actually open. And at that point, you would still already notice, wow, we're getting real low. But I think the gas angle might be one of those sort of red herring things where everybody spends a lot of time looking at the gas when we don't really have any proof either way if it was filled or not, other than somebody saying it was filled. And like Morph just said, and you said earlier, they could have gotten the money and put 10 in instead and not really filled it all the way up. But it's one of those things that you have to keep making fit into the information, but it could be absolutely meaningless in reality.
It's a good point. And we also don't know what the law enforcement's view of low on gas means. That could mean that there was still a gallon or two in there. It could have been plenty for them to actually get home. I think it gets stuck in people's minds because we're all trying to figure out how much traveling actually happened while this was occurring to them. I don't think that someone would necessarily go joyriding with two bodies in the trunk, particularly that close to a police station and a sheriff's office. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But in terms of trying to understand where the crime scene is, because we're talking about a situation where we know there's a drop site, which is where their car was taken and left, but there's also a crime scene, and we're still trying to identify where exactly that is. And there might even be a third location, which is where the girls could have been abducted or where this person could have approached them. So trying to piece all this together gets really tricky, and I think that's why so many people do focus on that. Something else I found interesting was the distance between the payphone they used at 10:30 and the payphone they used at 11:30 is about 25 miles. Yet in terms of time, they get to that second payphone an hour later. Google says it's only 37 minutes of driving if you go straight there. Now, we do know that they were lost, so there's some potential that they could have gotten off track or kind of not taken the most direct route. But if you were already in Headland, how do you drive 40 to 60 minutes without realizing that you're not finding this party that you're supposedly heading towards? That's really another aspect of this that boggles my mind.
Yeah.
Just from
it is strange, but at the same time, they did ask for directions at the Big Little convenience store. So
yeah,
that means they were lost, right?
Well, you would think so. Now, I guess there's some possibility that maybe they were trying to buy time. You know, they were going to call home and say, yeah, we're lost, but we just got directions. Mm-hmm. But in that case, would you really need to actually ask a woman? And we know that, you know, the woman was actually asked for directions. So, yeah, I do struggle with that as well. I just don't know how they would have gone being lost for so long without just, you know, turning around, heading back to Headland, getting back to that phone that they called from the first time and saying, hey, where's this party again? We can't find it.
Yeah, it could be that they were, you know, they're 17, they're in a car playing music, they thought they were on the right road, and 20 minutes later they're like, hey, where the hell are we?
Could be.
Who knows?
Yeah.
It's one of these things. There's so many things that it seems like they're facts, but it's hard to put them all together into a cohesive story. That's why this case is so intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know some people might hear that and say, oh, well, you know, what if they were, you know, smoking a little marijuana or something like that? We know from the autopsy results, no alcohol or drugs are found in either girl's system. Now, we also have law enforcement search an area called Depot Lane, close to the cross street Jones. We don't know why they searched that particular area, and we definitely don't know if they found anything there. We've already mentioned, and this actually came out several months later through forensic testing, but semen was found on JB's bra, panties, and skin. And I think that's the only piece that really gives us any hint of a possible motive here. Morph, what do you think about the DNA that's found? Do you think that is tied to the crime? Do you think something else is going on with that?
To me, I would think that it is, because if it was from something consensual earlier, you know, not to be too graphic, but it would have been most likely cleaned up. So for it to remain as much as it did, for them to find all of it in those different locations, I tend to think that it's from the killer. And for me, that's the single most important piece of evidence in this entire case, because if police haven't tied that to someone by now, and that person, you know, if they have and they have a good explanation, that's one thing. But for me, that's the single most important thing. They need to find out who that DNA belongs to and why it was on her body and her clothing, and go from there. And if they can prove that it's a consensual act, then that's one thing. That's one less rabbit hole. But for me, that's the single most important piece of this case.
The thing that gets me is without that piece, we have absolutely no motive at all. We have to believe that it was just a killing for the sake of killing, and there's nothing else involved. We know it's not a robbery. We know the vehicle wasn't taken. We know their purses were left behind. So without that piece, without considering that as a potential motive, what the heck? There's people out there waiting to kill two innocent girls that go driving by for no good reason. Unless there's something else at play here that is just outside of them completely. Someone that wanted to get back at the police and try to set this up to make it look like the police had harmed the girls in some way. And maybe that's why the vehicle was taken back to that particular area and the driver's license was left out and the window was left down. I don't know. But without that, yeah, understanding the motive's already tough on this case. Without that, it seems like there isn't one at all.
I feel like JB is the focus of the killer. It seems like she was sort of the goal, you know, much like in the Jamie Kloss case, she was the target, and they took her, and the guy took her. And in this case, it seems like JB is the target, and then Hawlett was just an unfortunate. I mean, obviously, both of them being killed is unfortunate, but she was just there and she was killed as well, as sort of collateral damage, basically.
And then we get a very interesting source for the next piece of physical evidence. In March of 2000, a woman who lived south of Ozark comes forward saying she heard screams and 2 gunshots the night of the murders. A nearby barn and collapsed garage are near where the woman lived. And Gray and I actually did a little footwork together to confirm the location there. He did it based almost on just the description that we were finding on web sleuths about it, but I found a photo and we matched those up and found the location. What do you think, Gray? What do you think about that location in particular? Kind of rural area, right? Not a lot of services around it.
Yeah, and I think we confirmed the location that at least that's the area that they searched, because you actually found a photo in an article, right? Mm-hmm. And then I found Google Earth, and it looks like there's been more damage done to it at this point. And it's exactly, literally from that intersection, the crazy intersection right out of a cartoon. It's 5 miles exactly, and that's exactly how it was worded, that it was 5 miles. But the location is... It's interesting because there's even a pond, and it's secluded from the main road there, which is 123. So this is off of 123, and as you heard earlier, that could have been easily the route that the girls went on accidentally because of the poor signage. So it was off of 123, and if you go onto that property and take a right, it goes behind like a berm, and then there's a pond and muddy areas back there, which is interesting because they had some mud below their knees, and there is some on their car too, so that part's still kind of confusing.
Yeah, and I do know that Chief Spivey said at one point that they were trying to get some testing done, some soil testing on the mud that was found on the girls, possibly to match it up to the location there as well. Now, at that location, they did find a 9mm bullet, and I've seen conflicting reports if this was actually a fired round and it was the casing they found, or if it was an unspent bullet. I believe the more solid information is that it was a whole bullet that had not been fired, and it was not the same brand. However, Chief Spivey said that it's not uncommon for people to use different brands of bullets in the same gun. So they sent the casing and soil sample to the state forensic lab, and there are no public updates released on that. They also have soil tests on the tires that they collected and sent into the lab. No real updates on that. The car was found close to a hospital. So is there some potential that the murderer got injured or potentially worked there? The hospital is really nearby to where the car is, and especially for looking for services that were open at that time of night or where people would be working at that time of night. One of the few places in Ozark that might have employees. Of course, we have the consideration that I mentioned earlier. Are we looking for 3 scenes or 2? Was there a spot where they were picked up, a spot where they were assaulted, and then the drop-off spot? Or did the pickup and the assault happen at the same spot? That's one of the big questions of this case, and I don't know that we still... I'm not even sure if law enforcement has an answer on that. I'm certain they have a theory. Was the car dropped at Herring to protect the original crime scene, to get the killer closer to a ride home, or to cast suspicion on someone that lived close to the dump site? That almost ties into what we're going to be talking about next week with the case of Johnny Barentine, who is pretty much named a suspect. And I don't think it's in any small part due to how close he lives to where that car was dropped. I found one article that really grabbed my attention where Police Chief Tony Spivey was almost kind of complaining about getting some of the evidence processed. He said he was at the mercy of the Department of Forensics in Alabama and Washington, D.C., and at that time, evidence items that haven't been processed yet were particles from inside J.B. Beasley's Mazda. I don't know what type of particles. Tire impressions from the scene where the bodies were found. Which would be interesting because I assume they're not talking about tire impressions from the Mazda. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So what do you guys think? They got to be talking about other tire impressions, right?
Yeah, that's what I would think. They wouldn't need to do that unless they wanted to verify that they found tire tracks someplace and they wanted to see if it belonged to that Mazda, just to verify that. But to me, it makes sense the other way around, that it's possibly a suspect vehicle that they wanted to look into and see what kind of tire it had and what kind of vehicle it might belong to.
Well, that actually then leads you to believe that there would have been more than one person involved, right? Because somebody had to drive their car because they weren't killed there. So JB and Tracie were not driving their vehicle when it was placed there. So if another car pulled up, was it just somebody to pick up that person, perhaps? But back then, cell phones weren't as common as they are now. So that's interesting.
Well, I guess there's another possibility that the vehicle, the second potential vehicle we're talking about, could have been left there earlier, and somehow the culprit maybe walked over to the 123 and flagged them down, like he was having trouble with his vehicle or something. I don't know.
That's a good point. Yeah.
There is a bunch of different possibilities around that. He also complained that soil found on the clothing of the girls. He was still waiting for the results on that. And in this article, he does say fingerprints found on the car. I don't know if he's talking about the palm print, but it specifically says fingerprints. So I'm thinking there might be more than we've heard in most of the official press on this. And then he cracks out this mystery item, which we have no idea what it is, but he says he's waiting for information back on this mystery item. Investigators are reported to feel pretty confident that they have found the site that the murders took place on Highway 123 south of Ozark, the same site that Gray was able to find. Evidence has been collected from the scene, including the 9mm unspent bullet found at the location. Another item of evidence collected at the scene has been sent to the lab for processing. This is the mystery item. Don't know what it is. Although exactly what the item collected hasn't been released to the public. And still, to this date, as far as I know, has not been released to the public. So that's it for most of the evidence that we can at least confirm through some type of news report or comment that came in through a news report. Outside of that, we have some possible rumored evidence considerations. One of them is a ball cap that was normally in JB's car that seemed to be missing. And this is a red Boston Red Sox ball cap. Her sister Jackie says it was always in the car, but when police came upon the car, nothing was mentioned about this ball cap, and the family has not seen it since. Morph, do you have any insight on the ball cap?
Nothing solid. It's pretty much what's rumored to have been in the car, and I don't know that there's any way to verify that short of somebody reaching out and confirming that for us.
Yeah, I mean, her sister's definitely adamant about it, and thankfully we've been coordinating with Tricia Griffith, the owner of Web Sleuths, and she's been kind enough to share some information that we're going to have on an upcoming episode where we're going to have some comments from Jackie, and you can hear it directly from her. So stay tuned for that as we roll forward with this. We also have mention of a possible grease stain found on the back seat of JB's car, and that grease stain wound up being compared to gloves in the glove compartment of Johnny Barentine's trunk. And next episode, we'll be getting all into Johnny Barentine. But grease stain in the back seat of the car, certainly interesting. Makes you think about the possibility that someone maybe threatened them with a weapon and then got into their vehicle and forced them to drive somewhere while they were in the back seat. I think that's kind of, do you guys see any other situations that could have happened around that?
If we look at the whole picture where somebody walks up to them out in the open on a night, like in the middle of the night, as whatever time it was, there's not much going on in that area at that time. So it seems like it would be unusual for them to just see somebody walking out there and interact with them. So that almost leads me to believe that they were followed or someone was targeting them, because the other option is they just randomly encountered some killer out there that night, which just doesn't seem, logistically to be a factor.
Right.
And, I look at it also as when the witness that gave her directions saw them leave, everything was fine. There was no one following them. Everything seemed ordinary. So that throws a monkey wrench into the same thing I just said, that someone may have been following them or targeting them. And then that makes me go back to, well, maybe they did randomly encounter someone out there.
And they were even going the right direction too after leaving Big Little convenience store. So
yeah, the woman that gave them directions confirmed that they definitely headed off in the right direction, leaving there. Yeah. I guess there is also the possibility that someone that could have been following them or stalking them actually picked up on their trail starting at Big Little. Someone that could have seen them from there. It is close to a high school, and that's another thing I was kind of wondering about. Would they have been lost being that close to a high school when we know JB was at least a cheerleader for her freshman year? Wouldn't she have been familiar? Wouldn't she have gone there for a game or two, possibly at some point? So just another question that's kicked around in this case a lot. Another piece of rumored evidence is their pockets may have been turned inside out. And I know, Gray, you mentioned earlier that is normal procedure for some police officers when they get onto a scene, particularly if someone has passed away. They'll do that so that they don't have other investigators come through and keep rechecking the person's pockets over and over. And, of course, I don't know how reliable this is because we're in rumored evidence territory. Is this just part of the urban legend kind of folklore aspect that's grown around this case that's trying to sell people on the thought that, law enforcement is involved in some way, possibly? And then literally, this is really reaching into rumored evidence here, but one person in particular says that her brother was being trained by the police department, and in that training, he did get to review a photo from that scene, and he says specifically that the girls were bound in the photo that he saw. I don't know if I believe that necessarily or not. In particular, why would Tracie have been bound if she was kind of executed in the way she was? And to Gray's point, it seems like JB became the focus of this crime. I don't know. You guys have any thoughts on that, Morph?
Unless it was just to subdue her. Well, if she's sort of in the way and he wants to do something, with JB, he has her targeted. Maybe he subdues her by binding her during that time and then shoots her later once he decides he needs to kill them. But again, I'm a little bit hesitant to believe they were bound without the police confirming that.
Yeah.
I also find it odd that someone would show a crime scene photo to a victim's family member, even if they were training to become a police officer. Not to say it doesn't happen. It could happen, but it would be great to hear from her family if that's true. Maybe they could reach out to us and verify.
I don't think it was a family member. I think this is just another local in the area, and this sounds like every urban legend you ever heard, but it is a local, and it's her brother, and her brother was the one that was in this training and saw this photo. So the old "a friend of a friend told me" type situation.
And we know where that goes most of the time.
Yeah, we've been doing this a while. All right. Well, guys, that is it for most of the evidence. And I just want to ask you, what piece do you think is the most important piece of evidence that we talked about today? Gray?
Well, as Morph said earlier, I do think the DNA obviously is the most important piece of evidence. And hopefully, if we can get the funds together, we can offer it to the police department and have them contact Parabon Nanolabs. That's I think that would lead to at least who put the DNA on her, the semen on JB. So if we can get an answer to that, I think you get an answer to who the killer is. I believe that the killer is who deposited the DNA on JB.
Morph?
Yeah, for me, I'm complete agreement with Gray. It's DNA. You have to explain where that came from. Was it something consensual earlier, or was it from the killer? Because they're the only real two possibilities, and that should be job number one. And hopefully they've done that. Of course, they may not release publicly that they've done that, but I hope they have. And when we mentioned trying to raise funds to pay for the DNA testing through Parabon, we're putting that out there, obviously, to help see the case solved. But we're also putting it out there because a lot of police jurisdictions nowadays are stretched with their budgets and they don't have the funds always to do that. So we just wanted to offer a hand if we could help them to do that. If that's one of the hurdles, if they haven't been able to do it, that's why we'd like to help facilitate that if we can.
Yeah, and I do think it's an important thing to process, even in the possibility that it's not related to the case. Let's figure that out, and then let's focus on the next pieces after that. If it does turn out that this was a consensual act, let them trace that and let the police department know, hey, it turned out to be this guy. And then, oh, well, we know that JB was spending some time with him. Okay, well, now how do we move forward on this? And I think if that's the situation that we hit with DNA, personally, my gut says it's not. I think we're looking at the culprit if the DNA is processed. But if it did go that way, I think the next piece of most compelling information we have here is the prints. And the prints, it's a bit strange because they're not 100% reliable. It's not as strong as DNA, in terms of analysis and getting those matched up. And did this person commit any other crime where they actually had to get their prints registered in a system so they can be found? There's a lot of ifs when it comes to prints. But also keep in mind, we've got that shell casing. And has the shell casing ever been matched up? I'm sure we have bullet analysis from the bodies as well. Can they find the actual gun that fired those shots is, I think, another important aspect to all of this. You can also find video versions of our podcast at my YouTube channel, Lord and Arts. And since we're intentionally trying to raise exposure using each of our platforms, remember you can find all of the information and links, because I know we're giving you guys all these different places you can go to find this stuff. Just remember, you can go to www.threemenandamystery.com with the number 3 at any point, and you will find specific episode pages with all relevant links in that one spot, including possibly some additional videos that Gray's going to do, driving the route with you, kind of taking you through a virtual drive of where they likely went, a bunch of other things that he's going to be adding there as well. If you have any information or tips, please visit www.daleso.com or call the Dale County Sheriff's Office at 334-774-2335. You can also call the Ozark Police Department at 334-774-2644. To submit anonymous tips, please call the Dale County Crime Stoppers at 334-774-9999. We have heard some people that seem a bit leery about calling the local law enforcement, so I'm also including this information. You can contact the Alabama Attorney General's Office Cold Case Unit tip line at 866-419-1236, or you can email them at coldcasetips@ago.state.al.us. We're always going to work hard to present the best info we can, but we're looking for feedback and help getting all these details straight. If you have any corrections or new details for us, please email 3men@threemenandamystery.com. That's with the number 3 in both of those. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter at 3menandamystery, once again with the number 3, or find us on Facebook.
And if you're looking for another true crime podcast to listen to while you're waiting for the next episode of 3 Men and a Mystery, consider Trace Evidence. Here's a sample.
Hey, podcast listener. This is Steven, the host of Trace Evidence, a weekly true crime podcast focused on unsolved murders and missing persons. Each week, I dig deep into the evidence, suspects, and theories revolving around the unsolved cases you think you know: Elisa Lam, Aisha Degree, Brandon Lawson, and the ones you've never heard: Lily Aramburo, Candace Hilt, Kanika Powell. If you're a true crime fan, haunted by unanswered questions, join me each Monday for a thorough examination of the victims, their stories, and the unknown perpetrators behind them. Trace Evidence is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, and all your favorite podcatchers. Visit trace-evidence.com for a full list of episodes, transcripts, and to subscribe today.
3 Men in a Mystery is produced by John Lorton, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
And if you will, please rate us on the podcasting platform that you found us on and help us grow by telling your friends and family about the show.
I'm John Lorton.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are 3 Men and a Mystery.